And then we're on. Okay, it started. So I'm joined once again by Daniel Solomon, whose credentials I don't need to repeat, and for anyone who's been following this channel for some time. But economics, Danny, it's all gone very strange again. Just taking another strange.
Yeah, it has gone very strange again. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about markets that now are 10% off their highs in February.
This is insane.
I mean, it is insane. I don't understand it. Not a lot of people do.
Well, it's been nice talking to you.
Yeah, no, it's. I'll be off then.
Yeah, well, I thought it was worth a try.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're going to need someone a little bit more, someone who's in the Fed to discuss this.
I suspect most people would just give me a lot of smoke, whereas you at least are kind of holding your hands up and saying it makes no sense. But
it doesn't. I mean, you've got vast numbers of unemployed. You've got no economic activity. You've got shops closing down left, right, and centre. Virtually no manufacturing, and you've got stock markets going up 30%. I mean, it's inexplicable. It's inexplicable.
So let's go back in time just a little bit. A little while ago, like early on in Donald Trump's administration, we were talking about the fact that there's a famous Nobel Prize-winning economist. I want to say Kruger. No, it's not Kruger. What's his name? The guy.
Krugman. Yeah.
Krugman really dislikes Trump, and he said there will be an economic catastrophe within 6 months of Trump taking the presidency. It will, the whole economy will tank. And we were discussing why this hadn't happened and why the stock market, was it just the tax cuts? Was what was going on? And you said,
I mean, tax cuts have obviously helped, but I mean, Trump's a bully. So what he does is he bullies the head of the Fed, who is Jerome Powell, and he says to him, right,
physically.
I think he actually uses him as a sex slave, or threatens to, unless he reduces interest. Oh, really? I'm sitting in the best place for it.
How are you? I don't know whether maybe it's just at my end then. Okay, we'll press on. If you're in the right place, that can't be doing anything.
I mean, the amount of monetary easing, obviously, has been absolutely incredible. I mean, there's been trillions thrown at the markets. And I foresee trouble, not necessarily in the markets. I foresee trouble in society where people don't have jobs.
Yeah.
The economies have tanked and stock indices are at all-time highs.
Somebody said the other day on Twitter, they said that the stock market is best understood as a graph that shows you how rich people feel.
No, the stock market is a graph of how much money is being put into it by central banks.
Just by central banks at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, there are trillions and trillions of dollars. I mean, the Fed balance sheet is blown out to something like 7 trillion in the last couple of months since COVID started, and that just juices up indices, juices the markets. But if you haven't got a job and you're seeing somebody earning a lot of money by just sitting on their arse because some bloke in New York's throwing money at the market. And eventually people are going to suss this out and it's going to turn nasty, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and in America, obviously, where they can put their guns where their mouth is as well.
Yeah, it's not acceptable.
No. So even 2 years ago, the reason I brought it up, because I remember you saying at the time that you thought even then, and this was before the stock market was trying to sort of conceal an imminent depression, before the Fed were rather, you were saying that a lot of the increased prices in stocks were companies buying their own shares.
Correct.
What was the advantage of them doing that? Stock buyback. What's the advantage? What's the strategy?
Well, what happens then is that their earnings are then basically a company makes money earnings, which are then divisible by the number of shares that they have issued. So their earnings per share go up the less shares there are. So that when companies buy their own stock, they boost their earnings per share because there's fewer shares in the earning. It's just simple arithmetic.
So that's to the benefit of any individuals who hold the shares, who still hold the shares, because the company's.
Correct.
I see. God.
But what's happening now is that in order to get a bailout, you're forbidden to buy back your own shares. But it doesn't seem like that's going to be necessary anyway, because the amount of money that's being thrown into this by all the central banks, it's just, I mean, the markets are just, it's like dystopia. It really is at the moment.
Is this mainly just the American Fed, or is it, well, obviously that?
No, all central banks are doing it.
The Bank of England has done the same, is it?
Yeah. I mean, you look at interest rates. I mean, if the markets start to tumble, they're like babies. The investors are like babies. They'll throw their prams out the cot and say, well, we want lower interest rates to take.
Their prams shouldn't be in the cot, to be fair.
Oh, no, that's also true.
Yeah. But they'll cause havoc in the nursery anyway. Whatever.
Yeah, in the nursery, and not only that. I mean, when the markets were collapsing in March, there were honestly serious investors saying, "Just close the markets." Yeah, they're not allowed to go down. I mean, why these markets? They shouldn't be going down. You have to close them. I mean, this is the ridiculous nonsense we have now in the world of investing, where if markets start going down, people say, "Oh, just close them."
It's ratcheting, isn't it? Ratcheting is a mindset, isn't it? And it's not just in the market. Somebody has said to me that liberal politicians get furious because liberalism doesn't always ratchet, by which they mean it can turn both ways. Do you know what I mean? It's supposed to be, the arrow of history is supposed to point in one direction only, towards greater freedom and equality and all the rest of it. And sometimes it turns back. And markets obviously clearly have the same sort of attitude towards their own prosperity. It can only go in one direction.
They do.
But
where this ends. Yeah, I mean, where this ends now, I don't know. I mean, there could be all-time highs in the markets when there are lockdowns. I mean, this is how ridiculous this has now got. Even Goldman Sachs came out with a note. Goldman Sachs, the bank that likes the markets juiced more than anyone, saying that this doesn't make sense. The fair value of this market is something like 10-20% low.
The Goldman Sachs has provided the Fed with all its chief bankers over the years and everything, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and even they know this is taking the piss. I mean, if they know this is taking the piss, then there's something seriously wrong.
We were talking the other night about fiat currency and the capacity for it to collapse. And there was that one article that we had looked at, which was published by a fragrantly biased website called Gold Money, I think, or something, that would end presumably every post it's put up for the last 20 years with "buy gold now and get out fiat," but still. Yeah. And their point was that, the asset inflation that is created, the asset price inflation that is created when the Fed or the central banks just create balance sheet, they don't need to print dollars. It just immediately goes onto the balance sheets of companies and so on. And the ordinary people don't immediately notice that the price of bread has gone up or anything particularly. It's not like the retail price index suddenly shoots up. It's simply that a certain sector of society, a certain strata, just start getting wealthier and wealthier, and nobody else sees any action.
Correct. This is exactly. I mean, this ties in exactly with the markets, which is what I'm saying. There's the people who own the assets are getting richer and richer, and the people who don't own any assets are getting poorer and poorer. The middle class is disappearing, and the inequality. I mean, even people like Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Citigroup are saying, this inequality is one of the most serious issues that is now being faced by the West. But no one does anything about it. I mean, there's only one way this ends, and that's with, people in the streets demanding things get fairer.
Armed insurrection. I'm just going out to the street and back up onto a level, because I think it might be my fault. I think I might be able to
exactly. I mean, this. Yeah.
It was a phrase of our friend Merrin Somerset Webb.
You're looking better. I can hardly see you.
I'm outdoors now.
You completely disappeared. Oh, you're outdoors.
I'm outdoors, and then I'm going to go back in, very close to the internet, because that was getting very glitchy, and I think I might be able to improve that. I was down in the basement. Hang on. Merrin Somerset Webb.
Yes.
And she said to me, this is one of those phrases that I hadn't ever heard before, but I wonder whether it's like sort of forbidden knowledge. She said all riots are fundamentally bread riots.
Correct.
Said the thing that people don't know about the French Revolution is that it was not precipitated really by the gradual build-up of inequality over the course of the entire 18th century. It was precipitated largely by the disruptive harvests that came about as a result of a huge volcanic explosion in Indonesia. 1786, I think it was.
Was it Tambora?
I don't know which one it was. It wasn't the one that Krakatoa, because that was like 1880s or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was later.
1789, the French Revolution followed after 2 years of famine caused by the sun being blotted out, partly by the ash, but exacerbated by the refusal of the ruling class to force the landed gentry to lower bread prices. The landed gentry took advantage of the fact that there wasn't enough bread going around to hike up prices and profiteer and gouge. And eventually, of course, they all lost their heads and were put onto tumbrils. And
their masks, as they would say.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, that is as good a lesson in history as anyone should ever really need to learn once, isn't it? But
I think that food price inflation is going to be a major problem going forward.
Yeah.
And the things that people need to survive are going to become a lot more expensive. And I think that's when you get society saying, look, this is unacceptable because, you know, we can't afford to eat and you're making, you know, and the stock markets are all-time highs. This has to end badly. Yeah. It's been proved they don't seem to learn the lesson of how to ease off on it, do they? No.
Because the question is whether it is just inflation of fundamentals, or whether it becomes more like hyperinflation, whether it's quite a deliberate sort of debauching of the current, not deliberate, but like reckless debauching of the currency that really just starts to accelerate until it's not so much that bread is expensive as that the currency is just galloping. I mean, we see it happen in recent times. It happened in Venezuela quite recently, didn't it?
Yeah.
It's happening in lots of everyone always talks about the Weimar Republic, but it happened in lots of post-Second World War countries. I think in Hungary it was as bad at one point.
Absolutely. And the reason governments do it is because, especially in times of crisis like now, when they've printed trillions and trillions of dollars, one of the easiest ways to repay that is just to inflate it away.
Yeah, exactly. Destroy the debt.
So this is what's going to happen. I mean, the Fed can't pay this money back. No one's going to pay this money back. And even today, there was a Fed announcement, and Jerome Powell, who's head of the Fed, said, you know, now is not the time to worry about borrowing. You know, about well, you know, you're going to have to pay this back at some point. I mean, someone is, unless you just inflate it away, which is probably going to be what's going to happen.
Yeah, they will just try and destroy it in those terms. I mean, we've talked about this before, even over a year ago. I think it was on a blog, but the American debt was essentially never going to get paid back. Anyway, it was up to like $20 trillion and counting, and they had it was meaningless, the idea that they could pay that back. And it was only really the petrodollar, the reserve currency of the world, that sustained America's viability. It was kind of regarded as a stable investment, and it's still one that investors rush to in trouble, even though it's absurdly riddled with debt. Correct.
I mean, and then the petrodollar, I mean, you know, with people actually with negative, you know, oil prices or potentially negative oil, in, you know, $15 a barrel for the June contract. I mean, you know, there aren't that many people aren't going to need as many dollars, and there will be big fallouts from this. But if I was, you know, the Fed or Trump or whatever, I would say, look, let's get these markets down, because it just, you know, it's like, you know, it's like going into a poorhouse and having a party with champagne and smoked salad. People are not going to
meat cake. Exactly. It's the French Revolution. It genuinely is happening. It's unfolding in front of our eyes. It's extraordinary.
Correct.
I don't quite understand why Trump hasn't seen this as well. I know everyone likes to see a healthy S&P and a healthy FTSE 100. People cling to it. Even immediately after Brexit, the FTSE 100 fell quite dramatically and then came back up again, just because sterling had collapsed, and so suddenly shares were good value.
Right.
And everyone regarded that as a sign that, well, not everyone, but lots of people were like, oh, look, the FTSE 100's back up. That's all right. Then, It is odd how it is seen. There aren't, I suppose, many other real-time indices that you can study, but you should look at the Gini coefficients and stuff,
Yeah, I mean, the stock market is not an indicator of the economy anymore. I mean, it's just become a joke. I mean, it's become a completely manipulated and it's used for political purposes. I mean, Trump has always tweeted, look how well the stock market's done in my presidency. And this is massive for him. I mean, he's got an election presumably in November if he decides to hold it then, and he needs to, he can turn around and say, look, even with COVID, even with whatever, the stock markets are fantastic. I'm the greatest president that could hold it.
His electorate were the people who had thought they had seen through Wall Street. They have that thing, don't they? Wall Street versus Main Street, they call it, right? And they had that thing, and they've said, Trump is the president of Main Street. That was his whole pitch, and Hillary is in the pocket of Goldman Sachs every bit as much as the old traditional Republican Party were. That was his whole thing. And then as soon as he sees the S&P 500 going up, suddenly
he owns it.
Great index.
Exactly. I mean, and this is in an election year, the stock market in America tends to go up because presidents juice it up and they want to get re-elected and they go up. But to go up in a situation like this, to the extent that they have, it's just,
insane.
It's inexplicable, insane. And, again, tonight there was, it's gone up, and the index were up 2.5% today. I mean, and that's just in one day. I mean, the April has been the biggest, has been the greatest increase percentagely in the US stock market since 1933.
Unbelievable.
And that's during a pandemic. Now, that to me,
which is happening. There's no worse state for it than New York as well. New York City has had the worst, probably worldwide, right?
I think person for person, maybe, I mean, it's had huge problems,
Yeah, and that's where these places, that's where these stockbrokers are. They're like, it's like,
I mean, you just want to hide. I mean, trying to
trade through the streets on barrows,
Yeah, I know. I mean, who knows where this will end?
I wonder whether
it is worrying.
I do wonder whether Britain is going to fall into the same. I mean, I think Rishi's a fairly sort of sober character by comparison. He's obviously not going to be afraid to borrow in order to try and mitigate disaster. But
who?
Rishi Sunak.
Oh yeah, they all have to. They're all throwing. They're all mortgaging the future to get out of this. I mean,
Germany as well.
Oh yeah, everyone is. I mean, it's an enormous. I mean, everyone's just throwing billions and billions at this. I mean, they know that potentially if they don't, economies will collapse. But then again, they did this in 2008. They're trying to re-inflate the bubble that burst in March. They're doing a very good job of it. But at some point, you can't keep on doing it.
No, it's just bubble. It's just all that is left is bubble. It's not even it's not even a property bubble or a stocks bubble or anything. It's just all bubble.
It's just bubble. It's just froth because no one's making any money. I mean, how come these shares going up? I mean, the forecasts are dire. I mean, people aren't. A lot of the big companies are not even putting out forecasts because they know they're so horrible that they're not even going to scare people.
X-rated, just a sort of a folder with some blood sort of dripping down from the top.
Yeah. This is how horrible
shattered
it is.
Bones on it.
But yeah, I mean, it's just laughable now.
That's the only, I don't know, it's not in Upside, is it? But everyone always kind of goes, so everyone in every country on the planet is now in deep debt. Who do we owe? Is it like in, Alpha Centauri or something, But it's, the riddles of debt, where do they end up? Is it possible that because they're going to devalue every currency, they're going to print every currency into the ditch? That in a sense, no currency goes bad because they all go bad, and then they just lob 5 zeros off the end at the end of it all.
Well, coming back to the gold money article, it all goes back. It all relates back to. It all does relate back to gold, if you like, because you look at virtually every currency in the world apart from the dollar, and they're at all-time highs in gold. You know, that shows that the debasement of the currency, you can only really, it only really becomes visible once you have something like gold to measure it against.
Yeah.
And that's
even property is not. I mean, property is usually regarded as quite safe by rank and file people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not necessarily on the market, you know. And it was obviously when it was overvalued and the subprime mortgages collapsed, that was enough to trigger 2008.
Correct.
But again, property is a very nebulous and arbitrary price. Really, again, it's only whatever people will pay for it, isn't it?
It is in terms of residential, yeah. I mean, if you look at commercial property, I mean, that's pretty easy to value to an extent, because it's a function of the rent being paid, who is paying it, and for how long. I mean, and so it becomes it's a function of those three things. But the problem is, a lot of tenants are not paying the rent anymore because they haven't got any. You know, even big businesses saying, we're not open, we're not paying our rent. So how do you value that property? You've got to basically value it as vacant, and that makes it, you know, worth vastly less than it is with a tenant. Yeah,
and then brings the whole price of property down around it.
Correct. I mean, the only interesting thing I've read on property is that offices in the future, they say they're going to have to space people out more in order for, because of, are they going to need more space? Or are they?
That's quite an interesting idea.
Fuck off.
That could help them to sell out the top third of the Shard after all, then, maybe after all this time.
Exactly. One person a floor. That's what I practice at home. I mean, you know, I've got a floor, my wife has, and each child has a floor, and we just live, you know, I'm sure you do the same at home with your lot.
Well, you noticed I was in the basement. I was in the basement earlier, which until quite recently we had Airbnb'd, and we decided to stop doing that. I can't remember why, at the end of, around Christmas time. I think we'd had a couple of ropey tenants and we just felt, let's give it a break for a while. And that was handy, because can you imagine if we'd had one of them stuck here?
You'd have to mix with your wife and children. I mean, that would be
horrific.
I mean, imagine that. No, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with property? I mean, it does tend to hold up, you know, in times.
It's sticky, at least, isn't it? Because people will. What they'll do is they will give mortgage holidays and so on, because the last thing they want is to be taking possession of a third of the country's housing stock.
Correct.
You know, your mortgage companies.
They've got to make the banks not repossess, and they've got to tell the banks to behave themselves, and until people can get back on their feet. But being a commercial landlord at the moment is not a lot of fun, because you haven't got any rent coming in.
I think the main key to making it all work when the time comes to like reboot the whole thing is going to be pubs, though, right?
Pubs.
Yeah,
obviously.
That's going to be where it all restarts from. When they kind of try and bring us out of this medically induced coma that we're all in at the moment, it's going to be basically about, in Britain, not everywhere around the world, but in Britain, it's going to be an alcohol-led recovery, I would say.
Absolutely. I think it's an alcohol-led lockdown.
There has been an alcohol-led lockdown,
I mean, and I mean, I've been dreaming of going into a pub, and I've even dreamt of queuing to, you know, at the bar, which I usually find quite difficult. But I mean, it would be bliss just to wait and have a pint pulled. Now would be sort of my equivalent of, you know, a holiday in the Seychelles or something.
Imagine somebody said to you, I'm sorry, I just need to change the barrels. And you would just dream, wouldn't you? Just stand there. It'd be like a Cadbury's Flake advert.
Exactly. As
just
long as you
bliss.
Whereas before it's like, oh, well, I'll have another pint. But now take your time.
It's fine. It's absolutely fine.
I'm here. It will be an alcohol-led recovery, and it should be as well.
Because two things will happen. Firstly, three things will happen. Firstly, everyone will be obviously desperate for a pint and to get back into the pubs and to, you know, exchange aerosol vapors with one another and breathe in each other's faces with gay abandon. Secondly, they will want to actually get pissed in each other's company, obviously, and just feel that kind of tension draining away. And thirdly, once pissed, they will then go home, go on Amazon and other mail order companies and order loads of shit that they wanted for ages, but don't need, but can't afford anymore either. But fuck it, and so they'll max out their credit cards when they're
I'm fucked anyway.
So that will get everything going. Exactly. Yeah.
No, I think that's what they're planning on. I think that's what Rishi's planning on. And as soon as you're right, I mean, I didn't think of the expenditure after the
it's Keynesian. Alcohol is a
Yeah.
fundamentally Keynesian
Yeah.
good. It injects liquidity in
right.
every sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would really write to Rishi and say, you know, this is really how you've got to lead the country out of this mess, is to open pubs.
Yeah, it's true. And it will restore the national character as well, because it was always alcohol that got us through the hardest times, you know, in the past, the various wars we've had. And, oh, you're frozen up. Can you see me? Have I lost you, Danny?